You're an archaeologist, a cartographer, an explorer who's gone into the South American jungle a dozen times, not just survived, but even thrived. And not even World War I can kill you, or even really slow you down. One day, a friend of yours hands you a 10-inch tall basalt idol. He tells you he got it from Brazil and has no idea where it really came from, and it doesn't look anything like a Mesoamerican artifact. You're convinced it's the relic of a lost city, and that starts you on a quest that will end in your death somewhere in the green depths of the Brazilian rainforest. Today we're looking at the lost city of Z, a supposedly lost city in the Motto Grosso state of Brazil. But first, hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and blather on about them on the internet for your entertainment. With that out of the way, let's turn to the topic of today's video and get started. Percy Fawcett was a British officer who had charted hundreds of miles of previously unmapped jungle in South America. As you can guess, he was an experienced explorer who was known for making friends with the local people, not just by giving them gifts, but he made a point to act with courtesy and respect towards these people. He was also known to have a very active interest in archaeology and the occult. So when his friend and famous writer, H. Rider Haggard, known for such novels as King Solomon's Mind and She, gave him a basalt idol he said was from Brazil, but it also had no resemblance to known South American cultural artifacts, Fawcett kind of leapt to the belief that the idol was proof of a lost civilization from the depths of the Brazilian rainforest, and he, of course, believed it was linked to Atlantis. Because I can't get away from Atlantis and will keep finding new stuff attached to it even after doing the research and that led to a 17-part video series on it. Sorry, let's get back to the topic. The idea that the idol was an artifact from a lost civilization was cemented when Percy Fawcett read a document in Brazil's National Library called Manuscript 512. Let me focus on this document for a moment. Now, the author is unknown, and it is believed to be a transcription of an earlier document. It was discovered in the library's collection in 1839 by naturalist Manuel Ferreira Lagos and presented to the Brazilian Historic and Geographic Institute, and they turned around and published a full copy of that manuscript in the Institute's magazine. This caused an uproar, and you might be asking why. You see, the manuscript claims to tell the story of a band of Portuguese settlers in 1753 who were searching for something called the Lost Mines of Moreira, which were gold and silver mines believed to be part of an ancient lost city. And while searching in, I quote, a tall, glistening mountain range, they found a path that led them to a ruined city with Roman arches, crosses decorating crumbling walls, and at least one relief of a semi-naked figure with a laurel crown. Not things you find in most Mesoamerican architecture. It was also claimed that they found mine shafts with silver-bearing rock, and gold flecks were found in the ground. Now, what happened to these Portuguese settlers is unknown because parts of the manuscript are unreadable. And to be fair, the state of Motto Grosso does have active gold mines and is a producer of diamonds, so you can see how the belief that they might have found something was not completely unjustified. It wasn't just the prospect of treasure that got the Brazilians excited. You see, when this manuscript first surfaced, the Brazilian state was rather new, especially as an independent country. So they were still formulating a national identity that wasn't dependent on them being a colony or anything else. So the idea of finding an ancient civilization that they could entirely claim as their own, especially if it could prove a link between Brazil and Greco-Roman civilization, was deeply exciting. So throughout the 1840s, they mounted search and expedition after expedition, but nothing was ever found. And by the 1880s, Most believed the manuscript to be a work of fiction because no physical evidence had ever been found to back it up. Percy Fawcett, however, believed the manuscript was another piece of evidence for his lost city, and using that and the idol, he began to try and gather material support for an expedition into the Brazilian rainforest. But he was interrupted by a little international incident known as World War I. While he had retired from the British Army, he was called back into service because World War I was an all-hands-on-deck situation. He was given command of an artillery brigade in Flanders and was promoted from major to lieutenant colonel. For his service, he would also receive the Distinguished Service Order, so he didn't do half bad. After the war, he would return to Brazil, and he would start studying the local wildlife and do local archaeology, but by 1920, he was so frustrated that he made a disastrous solo attempt to find the city. He had to basically crawl back to civilization after shooting his pack horse because it had been horribly injured. Now, most people would be dissuaded after an experience like this. Colonel Fewcett was not most people. Despite his determination to see this through, it still took him another 4 years to pull enough funding together for a very small expedition. Just 3 men. Himself, his oldest son Jack, and a friend of his named Raleigh Rimmel, and they would bring a single pack animal. When he left behind instructions that if they were lost, no rescue was to be attempted, as he was concerned that any rescuers sent after him would meet the same fate. The last communication with that expedition was on May 29, 1925, when he wrote and sent a letter to his wife, letting her know that they would soon be crossing the Upper Xingzhou, a tributary of the Amazon. In January 1927, after no contact for, at this point, almost 2 years, they were declared officially lost. There are conflicting stories as to their fate, with some claiming they were slain by native peoples, with the last tribe known to have contacted them, the Kalapalo, claiming the men left and they saw their campfires off in the jungle for about 5 days afterwards, and then they disappeared into the forest. These conflicting stories would linger for decades. There were a lot of stories that claimed the men had gone native. One particular story even claims Colonel Fewcett became a chief of a tribe and fathered a son with one of the tribe's native women. Other stories disagreed with this and claimed that the men had been killed in a violent confrontation with native men. None of these stories have any evidence, however, and they were all firmly disbelieved by everyone who actually knew the men in question. One piece of physical evidence we have is that in 1979, Fawcett's signet ring was found in a pawn shop in Brazil, leading some to believe he had been murdered by bandits who stripped what belongings he had with him and dumped his body in a river. The story of the expedition inspired the 2016 film, The Lost City of Z. Percy Fawcett is also reported to be one of the inspirations of Indiana Jones, but I couldn't find any direct proof of that, no statement by the men who created Indiana Jones, for example. I did find that at least one Dr. Jones novel, Indiana Jones and the Seven Veils, does focus on the Lost City of Z, though, so there is some connection. So, in perhaps a semi-ironic last note, I have to mention that fate would end up proving Colonel Fewcett at least kind of right. You see, anthropologist Michael Heckenberger, who was working with a native tribe named the Kukuro, and using satellite imagery, was able to discover what we call the Cuicubo complex, an area of around 7,700 square miles in the rainforest, where it is believed that up to 50,000 people live. Most of the work is focused on a site called X11, which was identified through the presence of soil that has been constantly worked and altered by human labor, making it more fertile and useful for agriculture. So, there was a lost urban settlement around there, but there was no connection to Atlantis or any European civilizations. This was a completely American civilization that was gradually, for lack of a better term, terraforming the Amazon to make it suitable for human crops, which is amazing to me. There is one connection to Europe, though, and that's the reason for their collapse. While there was no direct contact between this civilization and the Europeans, it is believed that they were destroyed by European diseases that they caught from other native trading partners. So, while Europeans themselves didn't directly cause this destruction, they did bring the diseases to the New World that made it happen. It's on that somewhat somber note that I'm going to end this week's video. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or even consider subscribing, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. You can get a voice on future content by joining my Everwise patrons for as little as $1 a month. There's a link in the description below. And speaking of patrons, I would like to end with a special thanks to Big Steve. May he never be lost in the jungle, or anywhere else. Next week, as voted on by those Everwise patrons, we're going to cover the lost city of Iram of the Pillars. I hope you'll join me for that, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading!